And we're live. Hello all and welcome back to Sigil Spotlight. My name as always is Mr. Harlan Guthrie, and I am here with the talented Ellen Abolt. How are you doing, Ellen?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great for a number of reasons. Great because we have an awesome guest today. Great because American Thanksgiving is next weekend, not this weekend. And great because we have some exciting news for everybody who's watching. And if you are watching, welcome. This is, of course, Sigil's YouTube channel or Twitch channel. If anyone still uses Twitch, it's much more popular than YouTube now. That's a joke. But please make sure to subscribe. We got lots of cool stuff here. Every Tuesday, I'm running a D&D game with a great motley crew of people. We do this every other Friday where we bring on new exciting guests to chat with. And Sigil is a great melting pot on the Discord and right here on YouTube where you can hang out and learn lots and get the scoop on what's coming up. Speaking about what's coming up, Ellen, I think we've got some news to share.
We do have some news. We have some releases.
Wait, I'll do this. I guess it's a cause for celebration. I don't know.
No, it definitely is. Savage Worlds Pathfinder Bestiary is now available on both Roll20 and Foundry. So if you need some monsters to populate your Savage Worlds Pathfinder games, now you're all set. And we also have just done a whole bunch of bug fixes and feature adds and things like that to both the Suede core rules for Foundry and the Pathfinder for Savage Worlds rule set for Foundry. So if it's the full list is available in the Pinnacle Entertainment Group newsletter, but it's also you can check out the release notes and things like that. So if you've had any pain points, it's worth checking out. There's some really cool stuff that we've added.
Say pain points?
Pain points, yes. Like if things that have been driving you up the wall. Why can't I do that? Why can't I add? No, you have no.
I'm going to say that's an Ellen original. I think you just made that up for sure.
It is definitely not. No, I
Ellen original. You've heard it here first. I haven't heard it at least. But yeah, pain points. That makes sense. Points of pain. I like it. I threw off your rhythm.
Yeah, no. Anyway, yeah. So like if you've been missing like the injury table from the Suede core book or things like that, then definitely check that out.
Cool. What else? Anything else major?
Let's see. I think that's the big stuff that we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot. There's a lot happening in the background. Lots of moving parts, but I think that's what we have. That's like releasable at this point.
Fantastic. And of course, if you were a backer of S5E or you like superheroes, you can always check out S5E. As we mentioned, almost a month and a half now, you should have the first version of it in your inbox or however you get things through Kickstarter. I make it sound like I haven't backed things on Kickstarter all the time, which I absolutely have. And you can be testing out with your friends right now or enemies. If you'd rather play RPGs with an enemy, I'm not going to judge. Maybe it'll make friends of the enemies.
It's a whole different vibe suddenly at the table.
I would never play RPGs with an enemy. Well, the way I play far too vulnerable. Like I'm a big role player. I love experimenting with weaknesses. I love experimenting with flaws. And if I was playing with somebody who didn't like me, they would just exploit those constantly. So not a fun way to do it.
I don't know. I don't want to spend time with people I don't like. So I wouldn't.
Ellen, you do it with me every 2 weeks. We're fine. It's going to be great. Anyway, without further ado, if the news is done, let's bring on our guest. I'm really excited. It seems like an awesome person. And we were chatting a little bit before, and they have lots to share because they got lots going on. Please welcome to the stage. This isn't a stage. Mr. Jason Engel. Whoa, that crowd. Listen. They're crazy for you,
What
Jason.
Applause.
They're all over you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, thanks.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us again. Mm-hmm. I mean, we dropped you out and brought you back. You've been here the whole time, but they don't.
Yeah, I never really left.
Good.
I got to see you guys do your thing, and that was magical. So I'm glad I was here.
We aim every week for magic, even though we do this every 2 weeks. Every week on Friday, we still aim for magic.
Yeah.
Jason, for the people who might not know, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why they should be excited to hear all about you?
Well, excitement may vary, but I'm a fantasy artist. I work on art for fantasy games. It's a fun job. It's not necessarily an easy job to get. You gotta spend a lot of time getting good at it before people will like happily give you money to do it for them. But it's a good time. I work for a lot of the bigger game companies out there, in tabletop anyway. I occasionally dabble in other sides of the entertainment business as well, but mainly I've sort of maintained a career in tabletop games for the most part. Primarily, my main client these days is Magic the Gathering, mainly because the game is constantly changing and provides new challenges and ideas, and it's this kind of evolution that gives you lots to play around with as an artist. You get to be really, really creative in new ways all the time. Whereas, most of the games out there come up with, a core concept and a look and everything. And you're just sort of finding new ways to play in that same exact framework, which is usually pretty fun for a while. But, after a while, you can only really draw so many orcs before you're just like, man, fuck. More green, cool. Yeah, it's whereas with Magic, it's always changing. So it's become my main client mainly for that reason. But yeah,
and I think anybody who knows anything about Magic the Gathering can attest to the quality of the artwork, hands down. I think I've even seen people using old Magic the Gathering playing cards when they're making like D&D dungeons as some of the art pieces. I saw one guy make the Tomb of Horrors using old Magic cards for like the artwork depicted on the walls, which I thought was really cool. So they only hire the best, and you are one of them. So we are excited to hear from you. You mentioned tabletops. Obviously, you do a lot in tabletop playing. What do you have a favorite system, just off out of curiosity, or do you dabble?
Me and my buddies have been playing Pathfinder for a while now, and the reality is that most of us are in our 40s, and we're kind of too old to learn new stuff at this point. We've played, D&D 5th is also really, really nice. I mean, any system that allows you to sort of have a really good time without keeping your nose in a rule book the entire time you're playing. Usually that's something that I enjoy.
Are you a one character person? Or have you had many? Like there are some longtime players that have their preferred character.
Yeah, I gravitate towards certain archetypes. I think, I kind of imagine a lot of people do after a while. I've been playing since I was a little kid, so the end deal here is you make a few hundred characters, and you're going to start finding things in them that you enjoyed playing. And you're going to naturally sort of remake that thing again later, whether you intended to or not. So, I would say I definitely have certain play styles that I have.
But do you have like a name character? I know, and the only reason I say this, I
not specifically,
our favorite Vin Diesel, because he is obviously the epitome. No, but I know that Vin Diesel apparently plays D&D, and apparently he has a tattoo of his character's name. And to me, that
sort of indicates that he's either more of a successful player in terms of long-term play group interest, or just keeping his characters alive for an extremely long time, or he's just one of those guys that comes into a group and he's like, I got this character I always play, I'm going to do the same one.
That's what I was kind of wondering.
You gotta be okay with it.
Diesel impression, I like that.
you did it. That wasn't my Diesel impression. That's nowhere near deep or gravelly enough. But no, that always struck me as funny, because I'm like, who the hell has one character they play and they're able to do? Because D&D campaigns usually last for a year or two at best, before you kind of see something new and shiny, and you're like, that looks like a fun story. Let's try out. We haven't played a Ravenloft game in a while. That's kind of how D&D works with a group of people. You've got evolving interests and new products coming out that you want to try. How the hell do you play one character for years at a time?
And then also you're going to bring them to level 20 at some point, right? Like, what do you do after that? Unless maybe he's playing a lineage.
And that could work. Sure.
Maybe.
I don't know that I'd tattoo a family name on my arm unless it was a real thing. That's a little strange, but sure.
It's interesting,
you do you, Vin.
Well, that's it. See, Vin Diesel is always our top of list here for role players. We judge everything here on Sigil Spotlight by the Vin Diesel metric. We call it here. And so, how Vin are you is what we do.
Yeah.
How many Vin stars do you have? Are you a 1 to 3 Vin or?
Yeah, I'm a 5-star Vin myself.
I'm a 5-star. Well, that's
line up,
you, man. That's hard to do.
He does Groot, I know that, and apparently the Fast and the Furious movies are popular. So, like 25 or something.
These little movies, who would have
These
fun?
tiny little movies. Although, I mean, they are. I don't think I've ever seen one in the theater. I think I've seen the first 2 maybe on like at home, but they're making money. So obviously, D&D Diesel is doing it right. Anyway, Ellen, we have real questions.
Yeah. So you were talking about Magic the Gathering, and it just occurred to me, how do they, what comes first? Like the card mechanics, what kind of brief do they give you? Do they basically give you, here's the text that's going on the card, draw something for us? Or do they say, I don't know, give us a plant thing, and then they look at that and figure out what they're doing with that?
That's interesting, yeah.
I mean, that would be pretty cool if they did it that way. And it does vary a little bit, but 99% of the time it's pretty consistent. And it's basically the deal with Magic is that it's a very complex game. They actually did some sort of a study on it a year or 2 ago, and they came back saying that Magic is the most complex tabletop game ever.
Wow,
which I thought was pretty awesome. But one of the side effects of that is that when you're developing expansion sets for it, which they are constantly, it creates a situation where you have 250 new cards, say, for the expansion set that need to be balanced and play tested to see how they interact with the rest of the game. That's a huge factor in keeping that kind of game and that level of complexity playable. Because their main goal now is to keep expanding it and keep it fun and keep it interesting and try not to break it any more than necessary, because it's just got so many interacting equations that it's very, very difficult to manage in that way, which means that's the hard part. And that's the part that gets done first. And then they come in and do the creative development alongside the set design. They figure out what the set is going to be about story-wise, what world it's going to be in, and all of that. And then they sort of marry the rules and the creative development together and figure out where the opportunities are for little synergies, where they can have a rule that sort of reflects something interesting about the elves in this world, or, something like that. And then when they've got all that kind of figured out, they, and this takes years, by the way, and then they write up all of their card descriptions and to go along with the individual designs. And they basically conceive everything, card by card. And then they send out a spam email to all of the artists that they work with that they think have a style that's appropriate for that set. And they say, hey, this is when we're working on this. Do you have availability, and how many cards can you take on? And so by the time they involve people like me, usually it's pretty far down the development cycle, and everything is pretty well conceived by that point. So they have a pretty detailed description they provide. It's this kind of elf who looks like this in the style guide, and he's doing this, and he's in this area, which is on that page of the style guide. And so they achieve a certain consistency by having all that visual material that we then can use their description and sort of create something,
That's cool.
individual and new out of all those pieces. But the style guides are really interesting too, because that actually comes a little bit earlier in the process, usually a year before they start commissioning to freelancers. And I've been able to work on the concept art in the style guides 4 times. And that was really, really fun because, like I said, it's earlier in the process. So you're basically helping to sort of create the story as you go along, or working with the story team to, develop visual ideas that are going to help define that set when it releases. But like I said, it's about a year that goes by between concept art to commissioning to the individual artists. And then it's about a year after that before it actually hits shelves.
Wow.
And it was about a year in play testing and development before even the concept art started. So, I mean, it's a very long-term process.
You make it sound remarkably well coordinated. How many moving parts there are.
It's a pretty big system. They've really refined it over the years. I mean, the processes they have in place now, and the army of people that help with playtesting and with design, and I mean the whole game looks like it would be simple and easy to make, and it's thousands of people putting in years of effort, just to make little pieces of cardboard. It's pretty remarkable that they've figured out the best possible way to do it. But one of the reasons is it's that level of complexity, but it's also one of the most popular tabletop games ever, which means it's incredibly profitable because it's got even with all these people working on it, it makes as much money as a major tentpole movie every year. And it doesn't cost anywhere near what those cost. It does cost quite a lot more than you imagine it would, because it takes a lot of folks to make it run as well as it does. But it's still nowhere near the level of investment that Hollywood is willing to risk on a Vin Diesel movie, for example.
Love my Vin.
Yeah.
Gotta get that guy in there. That's fascinating. Do they go as far as like framing too, or just sort of like, they say, oh, we want it for the character art. Do we want it chest height, or is it a little bit more loose than that?
Sometimes they address composition in the description. Most of the time, though, that is one of the main areas that they let us play around with what the best approach is. Because if they do too much of that, I think you'd end up finding that designers will overlap a lot in what they come up with, whereas artists are going to be a little bit more creative with our solutions, because we're a little bit more practiced at that stuff than designers are.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Well, and you guys know where your skills are.
Say again?
Oh, go ahead, Ellen.
Okay, well, and you guys know where your skills are. So, if one of you's like, God, I can't draw. I don't like how I draw people in 3/4 view or whatever. Then you guys can just kind of.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, we know where our weaknesses
anything.
Well, yeah, but
as
if you're
far
just
away from those as possible. So it's like, I don't love drawing feet, but.
Oh, but the new foot
part, but it just means
we have a whole line.
I'm going to be drawing people wearing boots, or they're going to be cut off at the knees.
Yeah,
that's good.
It's kind of a thing. It's you definitely know where
Magic the Gathering is what I'm curious. Do you play it?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I've played Magic since I was a kid as well. It was pretty neat to see it sort of pop up out of nowhere one day and then sort of take over the world in a matter of weeks. And when I first saw it, I remember thinking, wow, how has this not already existed? It's playing cards, but with so much more depth to them and so much more interesting, aesthetic and story attached. Because playing cards were always fun, and obviously they're very dynamic. You can play 100 different games with a deck of poker cards. But the possibilities for building that into its own sort of brand and with recognizable characters and stories and everything is basically what Magic figured out how to do, and of course build a much more interesting and concrete set of rules to go along with those stories as well. But yeah, no, it just struck me as amazing that it wasn't something that already existed previously, and it obviously was pretty popular and has just kept on going ever since. It's been a fun thing to be a part of. I don't play it as often these days as I used to, because it's a much more complex game than it was when I was first playing. It's much better balanced, but it's also one of those things where you got to memorize a lot of different cards in order to be really competitive with it. And plus, I'm a pretty competitive person, so it really sort of bugs me if I'm playing it and I'm just losing no matter what I do.
Yeah.
So
and losing against your own art must sting.
Yeah. Well,
staring at it like
that wasn't always a problem, but they've been giving me better cards in recent years, so now it probably would be. Yeah.
Do you play with your own art deck? Are you like this?
Do you have a deck?
Well, I do know a lot of artists that do that sort of thing, but I don't quite have the full set of cards in order to be able to do a complete narcissism deck at this point in time. I can't quite get there. The problem is you need land cards in order to manage that and pull it off, really. And I could do it, now, but without the land cards, and that would just be kind of like, well, what am I even doing? There's no point to this. But I usually do play with a card if I have one that's really fun, or I just really like the art, and I'm like, I want to make sure I look like an asshole, and I'm playing with my art, going, look how cool this is.
What a flex is that? Like, sit there with your little name card, at the random game store, and then just putting down more and more cards with your art.
Just go on about the art the entire time I'm there. Just like, man, this is just such an amazing looking game. But this guy especially, man, he knows what he's doing. Man, that's just so creative. Wow.
That's awesome. And then you can pull out all the other homemade cards you made too with your extra art. You'd be like, no, it's a fictional look.
That might be a harder sell.
Yeah, they would know, I'm sure. Yeah. Cool. What other, Ellen, you had another good question off the top, I remember you saying.
Yeah, so originally we were looking at like the list of just people you've worked with, and it's a really impressive list of really impressive resume. And so I was just kind of wondering, what was the client that you landed, or the job that you landed that you went, oh my God, I've made it? Like, what's that you're most proud of getting to be involved with?
Well, I mean, not to be redundant, but I mean, that was probably one of my first big contracts, actually, was I think I was like 19 or 20 when that happened. And obviously I hadn't made it by that point, but it felt like it at the time. I got to do a cover for Dungeon magazine back when it was still a paper publication. And that was kind of the first big contract that I'd gotten up to that point. I'd worked with a number of different RPG companies. I'd done a few covers. I'd done a bunch of interior stuff. But working on that was kind of the first time that I was going to be published by a real company and given that kind of leeway. It was really, really, really cool to have that sort of feather in my cap that early on in my career.
That's huge at 19 or 20.
Well, it was back in like 99 or something. So, it was early enough that Dungeon was still being being published with actual dead trees instead of just an online publication as it's been for a while now. But it was really cool. And then, I basically worked on and off for Dungeon and Dragon magazine for quite a while after that. Even after they went digital, as a matter of fact. But that was one of the reasons I started doing cartography too, actually, was because the people running the art department at that time knew I was kind of up for anything, because I didn't really have that many consistent clients, and I was still kind of building a name for myself and growing my career, which can take a while, as a freelancer. There's no real sort of set way to accomplish that task other than just do good work and do it long enough that people remember your name. So you end up sort of taking what you can get for a long time. And, in those days, that was there were less opportunities than there are now. But for a company like that, I was willing to do pretty much anything they or at least try, anything that they needed me to do. And so they knew I was pretty, open to different projects. So they asked me if I wanted to do maps one time, and I was like, sure. Yeah. And it was kind of right after the D20 craze had sort of kicked off, and they were experimenting with the grid style maps that were more zoomed in, and basically they're battle maps or whatever they call them. Pathfinder calls them flip maps now, but they're essentially designed for actual miniatures to fit on a 1-inch grid and have a more kind of illustrated backdrop. And the reason they asked me to do that was because at the time they didn't have people for that job. It was kind of a new thing, and their cartographers just weren't illustrators. They were cartographers. They're good at line work and small details and all that, but they had a little bit of trouble getting things to look, well lit and realistic from a top down perspective that's that zoomed in. So I got to start off doing that stuff, and they used me for a lot of that until that became like a main part of 4th edition D&D, because they were really promoting the miniatures at that time. It was a huge component in the brand, and so they made those large maps kind of a big part of it. And that was a huge break for me, because I started doing those, and it paid really well. So I did a lot of them, and I got to kind of help define that look for that product in the business. And that's honestly probably the main reason that I'm still doing them now for Paizo, is because it's something I've just been a part of for that long, and I love sort of having the attachment to that legacy of the category.
I called it. We were looking at your website, and I'm like, I think I've seen this. Looks like Paizo maps.
Yeah.
There you go. You've died on many of them, Ellen.
Yeah. I don't actually pay very much Pathfinder anymore.
That tree. But... That's right.
Yeah. So with the map making, so you say you're still doing a bunch of cartography. How has, in light of the rise of VTTs, how has that changed how you approach cartography? Because that's a little bit of a different game. There's different tools available on VTT versus print maps.
Sure, there are. It hasn't really affected me a great deal, because I tend to not do nearly as much cartography as I did back then. The work that I'm still doing now is basically on commission for the Pathfinder flip tiles and flip map lines. Those are the only two places I do cartography anymore, and it's not really the job that I do that pays the majority of my salary. It's something I do more for fun, really, than anything else. So it's something that hasn't really changed my approach, because I'm just getting told, how to draw the maps as it is, and the amount of creative freedom that I have to inject into this stuff is fairly limited. That's actually one of the things that appeals to me about it, though. It's because it is a smaller portion of my job, but it's a portion that allows me to use a different style of creative thinking than I do for illustration work. It's almost meditative, really, working on maps, because I'm essentially taking a design or a layout that a writer put together that probably doesn't look terribly good, but it looks concise. It's enough for me to work from, and I just take that and I make it look good. And it's very, very easy to do compared to designing an entire illustration and using reference and all that.
Yeah, less of an emotional investment, because it's not on all your shoulders trying to get everything right. You kind of just do it.
And when you're using your creative brain to do an illustration, you're making like thousands of little, micro decisions while you're going through the processes. You're choosing what kind of coloring to use, what kind of pose gives you the most impact, and then you're also doing it at a much finer scale when you're rendering the buckles on his straps around his boots. You have to figure out whether you're highlighting it too much for the light sourcing or whatever. There's a lot of micro detail that goes into it, and it starts to get more exhausting to do at a certain point, whereas working on maps is just like, man, I just turn my brain off and just make it look cool. That's pretty easy to do by comparison.
Speaking of stuff that you're excited to do, but more on the fun side, and maybe doesn't pay as well, in terms of your personal project. Well, I put air quotes because I don't, regardless of talk, I'm doing it for you, right? So maybe tell us a little bit about your own project, this website that I'm looking at right now. For the
Mausolea is basically my personal IP that I've been developing for a number of years now. It's been a lot of fun to work with, because I basically realized a while back I was working on other people's games for so long that I sort of lost track of what it was about art that I loved so much when I was younger. So I started doing research on what kind of art really appealed to me today in the market. What artists, of course I track other artists' work, and I stay aware of what games are popular and all of that, but it was more of a purely artistic kind of research. Like what can I find out there that really, inspires me now in a way that, it did when I was a kid. And I realized a lot of it had to do with, similar themes and ideas. And it became, pretty clear at a certain point that I could kind of build a lot of these into its own world and its own brand. And it would give me a kind of a project to work on the side where I could experiment more than I can on client work. And I sort of realized how much fun it was, and I just sort of kept working on it ever since. And I've had writers come in and take my my world building and make it into something actually readable, and help fill out the design of the whole place, and give me a little bit more material to sort of attach the artwork to. It's been a really fun project to sort of build very, very organically and very gradually, but it's been something I've just done in my spare time for a while, and it's been really, really gratifying to see it sort of grow into its own thing.
I highly recommend anybody watching to check it out.
I'm planning on digging more into it once we get off stream. Actually.
And you can buy prints and stuff from the site as well. And you did a Kickstarter for this, did you not? For playing cards as well.
I did. I did a playing card deck Kickstarter a few years ago, which was kind of a limited run product that I wanted to put out there just for fans. I basically just printed up the exact number that I got pledges and put it out there into the world. But I realized during that campaign that I got so many people asking about it afterwards. And also during the campaign, they were wondering how they, could include it in their retail store. And I realized that, maybe making it such a limited item was kind of, a bad idea. So I developed a new one last year, and it's actually just released a few months ago. And it's different than the first deck was. It's got slightly different design and different art. But it's being published by Albino Dragon, which do a lot of poker decks that are very high art and unique, and they did an incredible job with it. It's actually the second deck that I've done with Albino Dragon. The first project that I did with them was actually a Cthulhu poker deck, which was really, really fun because I've wanted to do Cthulhu art for a long time. And it gave me a reason to do, all the face cards as the major Cthulhu gods. So I basically did, 15, full size, poster size pieces of art, because, I just had wanted to do it for so long. I went way overkill.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
I just realized I have this deck.
Oh, yeah.
I just realized the crossover. I'm like, Albino Dragon, I know them, and I love Cthulhu. I have a Lovecraftian podcast that I do, and I was like, that sounds really familiar. And then I looked at the art. I was like, oh yeah, I have this in my closet.
It's actually the
awesome.
second Cthulhu deck that they published. One of their earliest decks was a Cthulhu deck, so it was published way back when Kickstarter didn't really have much of that kind of product available on it. And they made tons and tons of money on it, and it was a cool looking deck, but it was much simpler in style. It was closer to a more traditional style poker deck. So this was an opportunity to kind of go a little crazy with it and put glow in the dark ink on the boxes, and use silver foiling and all that. And they really spent a lot of development time designing the most sort of luxurious, over the top poker deck, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, and inspectors like me just eat it up and buy multiple decks and then buy the original decks. And
hey man, I made sure they gave me plenty of copies, so I have stuff that I can keep in good condition off to the side, and then still use it when friends come over.
There you go.
The artwork is phenomenal.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was super fun to sort of reimagine Cthulhu gods, especially because they are really interesting concepts, but the way Lovecraft described things, as most of us know, is open to interpretation. So as an artist, it gives you a lot of freedom and a little bit to work with. It meant I got to go pretty crazy.
One of the things that's most appealing about Lovecraft, in my opinion, and why I made an audio drama, is that openness. I took a very traditional approach and made it very, very different. And if you're a Lovecraft fan, I should send you a link to my audio drama because it's a lot of fun as somebody who also enjoys that side of things. Anyway, I'm a huge Lovecraft. Or no, I'm not a huge Lovecraft fan. I'm a huge fan of the mythos. And I'm a huge
I'd say that describes most Lovecraft fans, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are a fan of like Lovecraft the man anymore.
Well, every once in a while, I get an argument.
Once you acquire it,
Well, this is it. Every once in a while, I get in an argument on somebody who's defending Lovecraft as the person and not everything else, and I'm like, well, let's take that somewhere else, because the guy was a piece of shit, but the stuff he did was really cool. Let's not split hairs here. No, this is a fantastic deck, genuinely, and
oh, thanks, man. Well, like I said, they did most of the heavy lifting on the design work. It was it's one of the cooler decks I've seen. But making the art for it was one of the most fun projects that I've been able to really cut loose on in quite a while. But it really was about the openness of the design. That's really sort of what appealed to me most about it, because it had all of these concepts, but they've all been kind of homogenized. You know, when you see Cthulhu art, you can generally tell like that's what that guy is and that's what that's supposed to be. But, you know, at least half of them are still just, oh, it's a giant pile of tentacles with some eyes and mouths. You know, it's really not that interesting of a design when it comes down to it. It's more just purely chaotic. So I got to figure out, you know, how would I design this if I wanted it to be, you know, like a real sort of modern approach to creature design, which is one of the things I've been able to sort of pick up when I was doing concept art for Magic, actually.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because a lot of the work you do as an illustrator is more about a finished sort of polished work. Whereas when you're working on concept art, it strips all that away and says, you know, what are the design components that make this interesting? And that's something I've been able to kind of bring to my work. But it's also the thing that appealed to me about working on Mausolea, because it is based primarily off of afterlife mythologies, all sort of, you know, poured together into the same pot and made into a sort of a big fantasy world afterlife setting. And that's a similar deal where a lot of these characters have, you know, sort of a modern interpretation of what they could look like. But when you really do research on it, you know, a lot of their the visual ideas and descriptions that these characters are built around are pretty open to interpretation. So I've been able to take a lot of these different mythologies and sort of stitch them together and design, you know, a kind of a more modern version of, you know, what they would look like. And of course, you know, there's a lot of fantasy sort of added on top, because the one downside of working with afterlife mythologies is that you don't want to get too locked into the accurate version of it, because then you start to step on toes that you don't actually want to. So you have to add a good amount of fantasy to make sure it's clear that I'm, you know, not messing with you know, with your story or your religion. It's that's outside of what I'm doing. I'm trying to, you know, take inspiration from lots of, you know, old stories and cultures and sort of build them into something new.
It's a fascinating, honestly, the stuff that you've done here with the characters, I say characters, but with the mythology behind all of them is really fascinating to see the influences that have made them famous, like, you know, the boatmen and the river Styx and stuff like that. But then seeing how much you built up on it, it's really cool, because similar to what you were saying with the Lovecraftian creatures, you know, you can kind of see the similarities, but they're also individual enough to also have that kind of that moment of like, oh, cool, that's like, you know, when you read the title or when you understand exactly who it is depicting, you're like, right, like that makes so much sense, because it's exactly that sort of those symbols and stuff that are around there. Really fascinating.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So I guess kind of related. Like, what would the ideal brief be at this point for you then? Like you've talked about how you like having a little bit of freedom, but like somebody to point you in a direction. So what would the ideal dream brief look like?
You know, that's a good question, actually. I don't know that anyone's actually asked that. I think when it comes down to it, it does help to have lots and lots of freedom. But I've also encountered scenarios where a client comes to me and says, I can do whatever I want, but it never is actually the case, you know? I mean, the reality is they're going to need something from me specific, whether they know it at the time or not. Mm-hmm. And some clients are better at articulating that than others. And some are more honestly aware of it than others. You know, if they aren't that experienced in the business that they're trying to get into, you know, they can think that just leaving it up to the artist is a great idea. And then later they realize that, you know, it actually was not specific enough or or giving me enough connection into the game that they're trying to create for me to do it in the way that they would have benefited from. But I think for me, honestly, yeah, it's having enough to work with that I can have a good time with it and know where it needs to land, but a really, really open sense of design in terms of how I get there. Yeah, that would be the ideal commission. I love having a lot of freedom, but I also know that I prefer to know what it's for. What targets am I shooting at, even if it's in a general way? What can I use to inspire it to make this piece something different and unique? It helps to have a little bit to work from. You got to have some kind of foundation there. So yeah, it's mostly open-ended would be the answer to your question, but
I imagine
a little bit to work from.
Disheartening than pouring yourself into something after a commission says sort of do whatever, and then at the end you're like, hey, this is what I came up with, and they're like, cool, but maybe a little bit more. And it's like, well, why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? If this is something you needed him standing on a plinth, why didn't you say have him standing on a plinth?
Right. And basically that's it. It's just do whatever, man. Do some kind of war god. It's like, well, I mean, I can make him look like some crazy toad demon with spikes coming off of his body everywhere, and he's got like weapons for hands, and he's got 100 different swords sticking out of his back, and they'll go, oh yeah, this game isn't like that. It's like, okay, well, I mean, that's what happens when you tell me I can do anything and it'll work, because most of the time that's not true.
Give you the world building chapter draft or something at least.
Yeah, well, God, hopefully not. I mean, when you work for smaller companies, that is the risk you always run. Is they're like, here's my 300-page rule book, just read it and do whatever inspires you. And it's like, yeah, I wasn't doing anything for the next 5 days.
Yeah,
so this was fun. Thanks for this project. It's like homework at that point.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is inspiring, but that's one of the reasons I stay away from those projects.
Yeah, say like, no, you get 10 pages and that's it.
Right. Just
give me the 10 important pages.
Like,
that's really probably going to know what's important more than I am, even if I read through this whole manifesto.
Yeah.
For real. Is there anything on a personal level that you've seen from another artist or another product that's just blown you away recently? Something that you were really like, oh, because obviously as somebody who creates as much as you do, you must also have that appreciative eye. Is there anything that you specifically recently were just absolutely blown away by?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I work on Magic more than other games is because I used to follow the art that came out of the game as kind of a hobby. It's always been a collection of some of the most talented guys working in the business today, all in one place. When I was growing up, it was, D&D cover artists were some of my first sort of art heroes. But then that kind of evolved into also, novel cover artists. Fantasy novel cover artists were a great place to find so many, talented guys and so much great work. And now you can find it all on the internet instantly, always. So, being friends with a lot of these guys on social media really helps too, because it's just, putting all this stuff in my feed automatically. So I get to be inspired by all the work that all my heroes and today a lot of them are actually buddies of mine are all putting out there all the time. I mean, it's one of the best things about being in this business. It inspired me when I was a kid, and that's why I got good at drawing in the first place, was because I loved the work these guys were doing, and I wanted to be able to do something that had that same level of quality in it. And so as an adult, I'm still kind of chasing that dream now, but I can sort of at least ask these guys, how the fuck did you do that, man? Like, that's crazy. Did you really render every little stitch in that saddlebag? What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
It's
there
a totally different.
Is there like an Everest that you're still waiting to climb? Is there like a comic cover, or is there something that you're still sort of hoping to get, something big?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be pretty cool to work on some movies at some point, because that is one area that I haven't really done anything in yet. And that is, it's kind of a mixed bag from what I've heard. I have a lot of friends that work in movies, and it's definitely one of those things where, 9/10 of the work you're doing, it's not going to show up anywhere. And it needs to be, a lot of it is concept art, but a lot of it is also really polished illustration work, sort of disguised as concept art. I mean, movies have a different barometer for quality and rendering and finish than other areas of concept art, simply because they have a much longer development pipeline, and it's also real world stuff. You know, with a video game, you can let a texture artist interpret your art in a way that is, you know, more appealing on a video game. But with movies, it has to look as realistic as possible, so they know they're going the right direction. You know, before they have the costume department try to build this stuff, it has to look good already. So I mean, but that it's a higher level of challenge, but it's also something that I've wanted to do for quite a while. That I've never really pursued it that hard, to be totally fair. But in a theoretical sense, that's definitely the Everest that I haven't quite you know, done the training to climb that mountain yet. But it would be a lot of fun to do.
Vin Diesel, as you're watching this, the next Fast and Furious movie, we're looking at Jason right here is looking to have a prime spot doing some concept art. He's going to go hard into the fantasy. Although I did hear they're doing a D&D movie with like Chris Evans.
They are. They're doing another one.
One of the Chris's is doing it. I can't remember which Chris.
It's
Pine?
Yeah, it's one of the Chris's. Chris Pine.
One of them
is starring in it. It's got a number of other big actors in it. It's clearly a well-funded movie. I don't know that necessarily means it's going to be a great one. I mean,
no, it really depends on where they, like, what angle they take. I mean, I would love to see a dungeon crawl movie. I mean, just to see what it would look like. Like, how neat would that be? But yeah, they're never going to do it.
Well, I mean, this might be that. It's like this movie is being produced by you know, the writer director that's doing it is basically doing his own, you know, creation, his own story with his original characters and everything. And the reasoning he gave was that there's a lot of existing stories and you know, brands and stuff that they could draw from in D&D, but he wanted to show something on film that really captured the essence of what makes D&D fun for most people, and that is, you know, original stories with characters going on adventures and all that. And I mean, I partly think that that's an intriguing concept, and then I also sort of think about it longer and realize that's just what they did with the other D&D movies, and that didn't turn out so great. So, you know, it could end up being a really fun movie to watch, but at the end of the day, you know, I still would have preferred if they did something in Ravenloft or Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance, because, you know, your original idea stuff is cool and all, but I bet you care about it more than I do, man. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough. Like, to me, I would be so happy with a smaller scale, like even like a Yawning Portal. You know what I mean? Like just that tavern, and then the descent.
That would be perfect. Yeah.
Right? To me, that would be the scale that if I was ever going to do a D&D movie, I would keep it on that level. Yeah. Something that feels really crunchy and like, because to me, the idea of being in a tavern and looking around and having such a dense scenery, that's the most appealing part of, like, you know, and then of course you get the big sprawling eventually, but that's later down. To me, it's the small, but who knows? I mean, they nailed the Super Mario movie. They nailed the Warcraft movie. They nailed it with, I'm being facetious, all these movies were terrible. Although I didn't see Warcraft, admittedly. It just didn't appeal to me.
Warcraft was better than it should have been.
I know that Duncan Jones was like a fan, and I know it looked cool. So I was like on board for that aspect, but it didn't have any Zug in it. Or we're being that's where I cut my losses at no Zug. No Zug, forget it. Man.
No, it's not my Warcraft.
Exactly. But no, hey, listen, I got faith. No, I don't. I have hope. I'll put it that way.
I have no faith in the ability of Hollywood to produce a decent D&D movie. But I hope that they prove me wrong, so wrong. I really do, because I'd love to see it be, you know, a new fantasy brand. Because and
I gotta say, not a year goes by, and I say year because I watch it almost yearly. Not a year goes by, and I say this without irony, that I am genuinely thankful that Lord of the Rings exists in a cinema form, because
it's true.
It is honestly just watching it. I show it to my son now. You know, he's only 4, but he still loves it, and I'm just, every time I finish it, I'm like, I'm so glad someone did this right, because we could have had so many terrible versions of this. It could have gone so wrong. Yeah. So the fact that Lord of the Rings exists, to me, says there's a hope that D&D
Yeah,
movie
and
basis.
it kicked off modern fantasy as a genre in cinema. I mean, before Lord of the Rings, no one was taking it seriously, and even when they were trying to get Lord of the Rings made, none of the studios took them seriously, and that's why they ended up having to do it so much on their end. I mean, Peter Jackson had to handle the producing duties himself for a movie on that scale. It was absolutely is incredible what they managed to accomplish. But it took that level of accomplishment to teach Hollywood that fantasy can be done seriously and it can be done well. And now we've had a ton of fantasy properties that have been better than anything we had in
Wheel of Time dropped today. I think the first episode.
It did.
I have not watched it yet. I don't know anything about the
I'm waiting to watch it until later this evening when I'm willing to give it an honest try. The reviews have indicated to me that it's not incredibly authentic in some areas, which does concern me because that has been in the past a big problem for Hollywood taking a brand that you love and then making it into a new thing. That does happen. I mean, I've seen interviews with the showrunner talking about how he's read the books like 6-7 times, and and I think that's great. And then he will talk for a few minutes about how authentic and how much effort they're putting into to emulating these stories exactly with great detail. And then he'll tell a story right after that about how they're trying to do something that's also new and different. And I'm like, man, what are you trying to do? You're playing with my emotions here.
No,
like, pick
okay,
one or the other. You can't do both.
So I've tried to read them. I made it through 2 books. I've read the first book like twice.
Of books, man.
It doesn't stick for me. And so for me, I'm like, yes, please change something. Like there's 1,000 pages of wasted content
and that is the reality.
already.
With some books, these especially, they're too big. They're too dense. You can't actually put it on screen the way it's written. I accept that. The problem that I expect to have with this is that there are changes that didn't need to be made. Yeah. And when I see that to it, being done to a story that I have that much, love and affection for, it always makes me cringe. And the show, the Shannara show that was made a couple of years back on MTV is a perfect example of what happens when you try to make it your own, but still try to do a thing that already exists in a way that's going to appeal to the fans in some way. It doesn't come through. It doesn't matter how much money you spend on it. You have to be willing to stick to the material when you can, in order to keep people invested and make them feel that this is a representation of this thing that they already love. Otherwise, you should just do an original fantasy show.
Well, that's it. That to me is the most frustrating part. They'll take something that exists that's in a book form, and then they'll throw in a plucky kid to appeal to an audience.
Right. Like this is the audience entry point into the story.
Oh,
it's like,
fuck the plucky kid. I'm done with the plucky kids. They always throw them into something like that doesn't need it, and you're like, why do you have a plucky child here? Like, I mean, it's a terrible example because it was a bad movie through and through, but they rebooted Predators recently and they threw in a plucky kid. I was like, in Predator? Like, the whole first movie was like just macho, literally was nothing but like muscles in that movie, and they throw in a plucky kid.
Oh, yeah. The entire script was probably like 30 pages long, and it's mostly just one-liners.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, yeah, again, hope. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to hold my breath on anything major because, again, they do have to appease to these. But the frustrating part is when they do it. And it's the same with like padding in our movie. They take an R concept like Wolverine and they make it like PG or something like that. But then when they do it right, when they do say, okay, fine, we'll do Deadpool the way the comics make it or whatever, then it ends up being successful. So to me, it's frustrating. Like I was a big fan of the Lock and Key comic book series, and I didn't watch the show. I watched the trailer, and I was like, that's nothing about what the series was like. Like it had kids, but they weren't that way, and like it had a much more Lovecraftian flair, and it was very like episodic nature, but they made it like a kids show. Like it felt the trailer looked so kiddie. I was like, nah.
Yeah, I watched both seasons of it, and it's definitely not a show made for a purely adult audience. I mean, I never read the comics,
Comics,
though I wanted to, and I may actually go back and read them now because I
Highly
did get a feeling that the show could not be that close to them. It probably has a great deal of the overarching plot in common, but the tone is just, you feel like you're watching a kids movie where Jack Black's going to come busting out of a closet sometime.
Yeah, like Goosebumps
I mean,
or some shit, right?
it's pretty wonky CGI here and there, and I mean, there are moments where it does shine and it has the kind of tone that you kind of expected, but for the most part, man, that's one where you just feel the entire time you're watching it like it could have been so much better if they had just not tried to like pick a target audience and build it just for kids.
Well, that's it, right there. Mind you, Witcher is a good example of what I think they're. Now, I'm not. This is funny because I'm not a huge fan of The Witcher, and but I know they're going like book source, and I know Henry Cavill is like all into it, and that's a show that regardless that I don't typically watch religiously, like I watch it a little bit, I'm all for that. I want more of that because from what I've heard, it's very true to the source material. Mind you, I could be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely has been. You know, it's been doing a really fine job of trying to take those novels and put it on screen and maintain this weird balance of tone. Because the problem with the Witcher brand is that it was a popular book series to begin with, but then it got converted into a video game that is in large part responsible for its popularity as a brand in the States. You know, the book started selling well here once the video game already had sold well enough that it was, you know, sort of an existing brand or a more recognizable one for people.
I didn't realize that it was anything besides the video game until after my family watched it, and all of a sudden they were like, "We're getting the books. It's original Polish series, so it's, you know, in translation." I'm like, "What do you mean there's books? Why would you read a book adaptation of a video game? That's never a good idea." And then they're like, "No, the books came first. What are you talking about?"
Exactly. The books have been interesting to read though, because it's a translation of you know, a story written in a different language. You know, so it means. You know, I don't always notice an author's quality of prose when they're writing. You know, it's not something that necessarily jumps out at me immediately. I usually get a sense of it once I've, you know, read a good portion of a book in a general way, but I don't look for it, you know, out of hand. But when you're reading something that was translated from another language, it's noticeable that it was translated from another language. And it is, it's occasionally a little bit awkward to sort of just, you know, keep reading and move past, you know, weirdly phrased sentences or words that are just completely out of place. It's still a good story though. And after reading through those books, I can say that, the show is definitely trying to follow the plot as close as it can. But what's interesting is to see the areas where they've kind of taken inspiration from the games, which are made by a different company and they don't have a license for, so they can only be sort of inspired by these visual ideas and sort of, you know, the aesthetic of the brand. But they're still able to take enough of that style and apply it to the show in a way where it looks like the video games are connected in a direct line. And that's a good example of how you do, you know, this kind of brand conversion to different media in a way that's trying to be authentic. You know, it's not trying to do other things than just be what the fan base of this product really wants it to be. And I've not gotten the impression from the early reviews of the Wheel of Time show that it was trying to do that in that same way. You know, it sort of seemed like they wanted to make it into a new Game of Thrones. You know, that was the first thing that I heard about the sales pitch that got it greenlit, was that Jeff Bezos wanted his own Game of Thrones show, because all the big studios do. And like when your main core motivation is to create something that is on a scale of something else, but not in any other way like that thing, it seems like that's not the right. It's not the right sort of, you know, origin point to create something good on its own. You know, you're starting from a place of just pure money.
You know what I mean? Like you nailed it when you said, why not just make your own thing? Like, to me, that's such an easier way to get what you want. You know, hire a writer, make an original story, blah, 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 then take something that people are so devoted to and care for, and then, you know.
And then make it different. I mean, that's...
by putting, you know, Wheel of Time on it, they've guaranteed that everyone who likes Wheel of Time is going to at least try it.
Right. And be pissed off.
And be pissed off, but like they're still going to try it. They're going to get the big watch numbers. And like people like me who didn't really latch on to it, like I'm going, like what I've seen from the trailers and stuff, I'm just like, this looks great. Like the costuming looks fun and stuff like that. And then so my boyfriend's a huge fan, and he was like sitting there complaining about like, this isn't exactly right. There's a description. I'm like, no, there's not. There is not a description. You have not read these books in a year. There's not a description for this. And if there is, it
We're
doesn't
being invited
matter.
into an argument between Ellen and her.
Well, no, I'm just like, it doesn't matter that the wood is a different color. Like, why do you care? Like, stop
You
it.
know what?
Yeah.
We're in the era, well, not even the era, but I should say we are in the time now where people are making TikToks to piss people off. And the more I think about it, the more the movies, the producers, makes more and more sense. And if you haven't seen the producers, it's about a pair of producers who purposely make a show fail. And it's a fantastic movie, Ellen. If you haven't seen it, it's a Mel Brooks.
No,
movie,
I've
yeah. Okay, sorry. I don't mean to talk down. I just, for anybody who's watching.
No.
But
There's a lot of things that you've seen that I haven't. I understand.
But it's interesting because I wonder sometimes if people are putting out these movies because people go online and flame them, and whether or not it's the worst movie ever made or the best movie ever made, both of those are equally driving statistics to what they want. People are going, oh, I got to check out Red Notice because it's, or not Red Note, whatever, I got to check out this bad movie because it's the worst thing I've heard. Click, oh, John Travolta's terrible as that fan in that movie. And yet it's making, like, now they have enough money to make a fucking sequel on it because, and I wonder sometimes if, there is a logic to this where they're like, well, what if we fuck it up? Word of
mouth drives eyeballs. It does not encourage actual, like, passion in the long term. It's short-term gains. But Hollywood has kind of always been in the business of shorter term gains because it's more easy to guarantee that kind of success. The long-term fan base that you get with something like Star Wars is not something you can just throw $500,000 at or $500 million at and guarantee that you're going to get it. That's not stopping them from trying, but the majority of the time they're going to shoot for the easier target, and that is just, let's get people talking about it, and then they're going to watch it. We may not get more than one season, but with the Wheel of Time, we're at least getting two, Well,
that's it, right? And I think there's a movie I watched recently, which I did not enjoy, but almost is the exact thesis of what I'm saying, and it's called Malignant. It's by James Wan.
Okay.
And if you've
I didn't
seen
watch that one yet, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I hated the movie. Mm-hmm. But no one could deny that James Wan did something purposefully and did something probably clever with it. And if you ever feel like wasting an hour and a half and really get what I'm saying, check out Malignant, because it is it's a fuck you in many ways. In many ways. That's all I can say about it. But regardless, that to me emphasizes this era. I'm going to just say era because it's easier, of like the movie that might be made to piss people off or might be made ingenuine, and I see these TikToks of people freezing balloons and cutting them open and then smashing them, and then colorful beads come out, and you're just like, what was that? And that's all they want. They want people to be like, what was that? Yo, you got to check out this TikTok because it makes no sense. And I feel like, sadly, that's spreading to many, many things. People are starting to make, like, there's a video game overwhelmingly positive on Steam right now, and I can't remember the name, but the visuals of it are offensive. They're bright colors. They're all over the place. They're crazy. It's something like, it's on the tip of my tongue, like Animal Jungle or something weird. And it's getting this huge following for being so offensively out there that people are eating it up. They're like, you got to check this out. They're gifting copies to their friends to check it out because they're like, you got to see this. It hurts your eyes to watch. And I am morbidly curious myself. I'm like, what is it with this game that is making people so, again, overwhelmingly positive reviewing it to get people to buy? It's very interesting. This. I'm getting all fired up. I got to calm down. Anyway.
Well, I think it's what happens whenever you get too much content of one type. People start looking for what's different, because they start to feel like everything's homogenized. And eventually, when high quality content is what's in a surplus, that means people are just going to start looking for pretty much anything that steps outside that norm. And something that's terrible but way different from what they're used to is, something that people are still going to be interested in looking at.
It's,
and whether it deserves it or not is another conversation.
well, I
That
mean,
is the
like
question.
even like if you do something that is like that sort of absurdist thing, it's still okay. Great.
Mhm.
Now I actually have something to engage with this. Why does this offend me so much? Why would they
Yeah.
choose to do it like this? It still gives you that sort of, I don't know. It gives you a different way of interacting with it. Like if you can see like a whole bunch of like really good movies, and it's like, okay, great, you're right, that was a good movie. Yes, the hero's journey, we figured that out. Like
Mhm.
it starts to sort of like, all right, I don't have anything more to say on this. Like it was a good movie. It was well acted. It was
Well, and you know what? I think you're right. I think Jason just nailed it too. Because like you look at the Eternals, which just came out, which I have not seen, but
Okay.
and I would see, but overwhelmingly what I've
Thanos was my favorite character, but I don't want to ruin it for you. But yeah, it was great.
Who's your favorite character?
Thanos.
Oh
He
yeah,
came, he
great.
came back from the dead.
Oh, does he?
Sorry,
Good.
I
Snaps
totally
his fingers
ruined it.
again, and
Yeah.
everyone comes back. No, but like the overwhelming reviews I've heard is like meh. Like it's not that it's bad, but it's
Mhm.
expected. It's very safe. It kind of just keeps it the same. So I think you're right. I think we are getting this oversaturation of media from anywhere, and we're looking for extremes. We're looking for, and I mean, let's be real. Politically, it's the same way. Relationships wise, the same way. Extremes are making a huge breakthrough now, and I think people are now just marketing that in the media as well. I mean, you're well, let's not get political. Anyway, regardless, yes, it's very interesting the stuff that we're talking about here, and very curious on how we got here. I don't remember, but it felt natural to get to where we are now. But regardless, Jason, if there was any project that you were currently working on that you were excited for people to check out, which would it be? Would it be your website? This one, Mausolea.
Well, that would be a great thing for people to check out, definitely, because it's like I said, it's an ongoing project I've been working on for years, and it's something that I do for fun. That sort of is a great focal point for all the things that really inspire me about art and about mythology and stories, all in one place. But I also have a bunch of stuff in the new Magic set that just came out, the Innistrad Crimson Vow, which is all vampires all the time. So I got to do a lot of stuff in that one because I do kind of the darker fantasy stuff. And a lot of that work was really, really fun to work on too. So, I mean, yeah, those are the things to check out right now.
That's
there's
awesome.
a whole lot more that's not going to be legal for me to talk about for about another 8 months.
what
So,
publishers should we be watching? No.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today. This was an absolute blast. Very informative.
thank you,
very
guys.
entertaining.
This was fun.
Please make sure you follow Jason on all of his socials and check out his website as well as any other work that he's doing, as it is always appreciated. And again, thank you so much, Jason. This was so fun. That is it from us. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And as my good friend Ellen always likes to say,
I have no idea what you're referencing.
there's no idea. Have a good night, everyone.